Hey, so grateful to be here with you guys. We've been in a series in the book of James, and as we've been walking through it, in case you don't know, James is Jesus' bold little brother. And what's really cool and unique about James, we started this series right after Easter, and James did not originally believe that Jesus was God. In fact, like the rest of Jesus' family, James thought that Jesus was crazy. It wasn't until after Jesus was murdered on a cross, was dead for 3 days, got back up again and looked James in the face that James was like, oh, and he began to believe and follow Jesus. And so now we're looking at a letter that James wrote to some early Christians who are having a pretty hard life. They're persecuted, they're kind of exiled, they're in a foreign place, and so he's been encouraging them as well as challenging them. You have to know about James as we get into today's conversation is he is crazy passionate about practical faith. And so I think he probably had enough experience with enough religious people who said a lot of things but didn't do a lot of things to actually help people. There was a lot of religious contradiction and a lot of frustration that went along with that. And so now that Jesus has brought a whole new picture to the table, he's incredibly passionate about a faith that presents itself externally. And so we're going to see a part of that challenge today. So I don't know where you find yourself on your spiritual journey, if you've read the Bible a lot or a little bit, but universally, I think we can all agree that the Bible it's a challenging book, partly because it's got 66 books that make up a collection and one story, but it's challenging. And so maybe you've never read the Bible. Maybe one of the reasons you've never read it is because it just looks kind of daunting. Or maybe you've read the old school version and that just intimidated you, right? Maybe you think God only speaks in like King James English, and I want you to know that's not true. And there are better translations of the Bible out today due to technology and education, okay? And so if you're still stuck with the KJV, run as fast as you can, okay? So the Bible is a challenging book, but maybe you've had some experience where the only experience you've had with the Bible is it's been thrown in your face. And unfortunately, if that's how it's used as a weapon towards others, I'm not really interested in being a part of it. And so what happens is because the Bible has so many cultural wraps and it gets abused and it's not communicated clearly, we tend to avoid it. We're intimidated by it. We're frustrated with it. And so then we don't want anything to do with it or the God that it might speak of. And so I don't know where you find yourself on your spiritual journey today. I want you to know that our heart is to meet you right where you are, no matter where you find yourself, and help you take whatever next step might be appropriate. And so what I want to give you is a simple, just one big idea. There's one major theme in the entire Bible, and it's the theme of God's love. You can see it, the overarching theme of the entire Bible, Old Testament and New, and it's the love of God. And today's conversation lands us, friends, in one of the most exciting topics and conversations that I find myself in. Today's conversation is the reason I became a follower of Jesus. I did not grow up a Christian. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I grew up with great parents, and what's up, bro? How are you? He's like, yeah, you want to speak? You can do it, man. He's like, I don't know. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and when I met Jesus at 15, this is what changed everything for me, and it was the love of God. This is what keeps me coming back for more. It's what's kept me away from religion since the day I met Jesus, and it's what makes me so passionate about the conversation we're having today. And so we live in a culture that loves to talk about love, right? Well, we love to talk about love. We have an entire holiday dedicated to, well, really the sale of chocolate and flowers, but it's around the idea of love. And so the challenge is we talk so much about love and we use it in such a universal way that we have a really hard time defining it. Let me help us out. I'm going to say a few things, and if you agree if you love the things that I'm talking about, give me like a yeah, okay? And a little bit awkward, but you just go for it. It'll get more comfortable, okay? So I'm going to go through a few things that you and I might love, okay? I love pizza. Okay. I love my dog. Yeah, which you translated for you. You're like, I don't know if I love your dog. I've never met your dog. Do you love your dog? Okay. I love coffee. Love coffee. I love my kids. Parents are like, sometimes, and I really don't know if I love your kids, Drake. All right, so I love the Avengers. All right, 3 of us. I was just curious. I love Pride and Prejudice. Actually, I don't. I just wanted to see what would happen if I said that out loud. It's not terrible, though. I love my significant other. That was an opportunity for brownie points in case you missed it, okay? I love tattoos. Okay. Stand like this. I love donuts. All right, Kate's not here. Kate and I have a very passionate conversation about donuts the other day. I did that for her. And I love God. Okay. All right, so I didn't set you up for that, right? So you hear like the different, like, yeah, ooh, and we're all over the place. The problem is we love a lot of things. We use the same word. Now listen, I don't think that my wife appreciates it if I love donuts the same way I love her. I'm passionate about donuts, but I better be more passionate about my wife or we're going to have problems. And so this makes it challenging when we talk about the love of God. Well, I mean, what are we talking about? Like you love cute puppies and pizza? Or are we talking about something more substantial? Part of this conversation is also, in our culture, we are trained and taught to focus more on all the ways that we have not been loved rather than all the ways that we have not been loving. Right? Think about it. When you go home on a normal day, if you have a complication, if the day's been hard, right, we're just naturally self-centered, and you might not agree, but that's okay. But if I'm talking about myself, naturally self-centered, I don't go home and think, you know what? Here's all the ways that I've wronged people today, and I feel really bad about it, and I should send them text messages and apologize, right? That's not normally my first thought. If I've had a hard day, I'm thinking about all the people that I'm mad at because they were unloving towards me. And so this conversation of love is challenging because we live in a culture that promotes the conversation in a selfish way. So if we're honest, my first go-to on my mind is that I think of love as being reciprocal rather than sacrificial. It's easy to love someone who loves me back or who loves me first. Love is way easier to embrace and initiate when it's reciprocal. Sacrificial love is a different category. In fact, sometimes I think we get passionate about the opposite of who deserves love and who doesn't. And so especially the closer you get to home, the closer you get to your relationships, that's when this conversation really starts to show up, right? Of reciprocal love is easy to dish out, but if my wife has been mean to me, then she doesn't deserve my love back, or vice versa, or my friend did this, and therefore they don't deserve the love that I was going to extend to them. And so we tend to think about love selfishly rather than sacrificially. Are you with me? Okay, so this conversation tends to be confusing because God's love doesn't find itself in that category. So what I want to do is establish a working definition for our conversation today. So I've got a verse here from 1 John 3:16, and this is a really helpful definition. This is what we're going to operate off of today. We know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So also, we ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. Do you see the order? Do you see the transition in this statement? Our capacity to love others, our capacity to love in a sacrificial way is hinging on the capacity for our understanding of God's love. We can know real love because Jesus gave his life for us. And so when we're talking about the love of God, what changed my life at 15, what hopefully is going to continue to change us and draw us closer to God no matter where you find yourself on your spiritual journey, it's this right here. We know what real love is, not internally, but externally. In fact, I think if we continue to look internally for our definitions of love and are trying to find the motivation to live a life worth living on the inside of us, we're going to continue to be frustrated and irritated with our patterns of behavior and lacking the power and motivation we need to find a significant capacity to love in real and big ways. Why? Because Jesus gave his life for us, which then gives us the capacity to give for others. The definition we're using is a sacrificial love. Over and over again, we see Jesus teach on this kind of love, which ultimately he would demonstrate by giving his life for us. And he invites us, listen, this is so important. He invites us first to receive this love, and then we have the capacity to extend it. Religion would say, work on extending it, and depending on how you're doing it, that's going to dictate how God loves you. And that's the opposite of what Jesus is communicating. And so our natural disposition is selfish love. And the love Jesus came to introduce is sacrificial. Are you guys with me? We had to do this on the front end because as we talk about love, if we're not careful, we're going to think about the way we love pizza, and it's going to lack some weightiness, okay? So 2 weeks ago, we started this conversation. We're in the book of James, chapter 2, and we are now in the second half of that verse, and it started out with a conversation around some of these Jesus followers playing favorites. And so James transitioned from encouragement to a little bit of a challenge because apparently they were playing favorites, and his big idea for us 2 weeks ago, you can go back online and watch it, was that God never plays favorites, but sometimes his kids do. And that's the struggle. That's the challenge that we see in our culture. Anytime you've been negatively affected by someone who calls themselves a Christian and they were unloving, it's because God never plays favorites, but sometimes his kids do because we're not perfect. And so then we are trying to get better at that. And so James is offering encouragement for this idea. Now, that was the big idea of 2 weeks ago. That was the macro conversation. Today, James is going to shift into the that was the micro conversation. James is shifting into the macro conversation of this idea. And it's this. When he zooms out on the idea of playing favorites, on treating people differently and playing this partiality thing of who I like and who I'm going to love and who's allowed to be around me, he says the bigger idea is a problem of love. Right? When you zoom out on playing favorites, what's the problem? You're being unloving, right? That's the problem with playing favorites. That's the problem with partiality, whether it be race or gender or socioeconomic status, you name it, you start to go through the categories. The problem with that conversation is love. That's the big idea, and that's what we're wrestling with today. So we're going to go to James chapter 2, verse 8. It'll be on the screen for you, and we're going to walk through this conversation together, and I'm very, very excited about it because I think it's going to help us all. It's been crazy helpful for me. If you really, again, he's talking to some Christians, and so if you find yourself in a place where you're not a follower of Jesus today, I want you to be able to listen to the conversation of what this message to the Christians means for the world around them, okay? If you, being a Christian, really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing well. High five, right? You hear that? And so this is a pretty cool conversation. Let me show you another verse, Matthew 22, verses 37 through, I think, 39 or 40. I think it's next. Yeah. So this passage is what James is referring to. Now, again, this is Jesus' brother. He would have remembered this conversation. So when he says, if you really fulfill the royal law, this is what he's talking about. Jesus was asked a question, hey, what's the most important thing that I focus on when it comes to trying to follow God? And these religious people were looking for a list of rules, and actually they were looking for him to say one thing, and then they were going to devalue him and say he's not a good teacher. And he blows their minds with this statement in response to what is God after. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. And later Jesus would define the neighbor as anyone and everyone we cross paths with, not just your neighbors, but including your neighbors. The entire law and all of its demands, this is so important, the entire law, all of the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. So this conversation, hey, if you're doing that, good job. And part of it, this should hopefully be encouraging. When we did student ministry, we worked with students for a long time, 6-8 years, something like that. And again, this changed my life, guys. This just totally changed everything I thought about God because it simplified it. Everything when it comes to living this life, he's just saying, hey, if you can love God and love people, you don't have to worry about any rules. Right? Why? Because if I love God, I'm not going to sin against him. And if I love people, I'm not going to sin against them. If I love you, Lauren, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to try to cheat you. I'm not going to envy something that you have. Or right? When it comes to love, this conversation is all encompassing. Why is it called the royal law? Because this sums up everything. So what's Jesus trying to say? Quit getting stuck on all the do's and don'ts and lists and trying to follow. He said, man, if you can just get your heart and mind around this one idea. We used to sum it up this way. We used to say, man, just live love. Just live love. Every time I would end a Wednesday night with our students after preaching, I would end the service and I would say, love God, love people, and all students would say, live love, right? And that was like our rally cry for the week. Like, listen, if you don't remember anything else, just live love. Because Jesus says that's what's going to cover everything else. And so if you're like me, you hear that and you start to feel pretty good about yourself. You're like, yeah, man, like just love people, man. Like we start being Jesus hippies, right? Like we're like, yeah, just love. And it sounds really, really good. Now in the next verse, James is going to transition with this big word, but. Now if you see a big but in the Bible, you got to watch out, okay? Pay attention. That's meant to be funny. It's okay. All right, so now let's just read verse 8 a little differently, okay? Let's just with a little bit of an emphasis on different syllables here. You with me? Okay? That was another joke. All right. If you really fulfill the royal law, according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing well. So let me ask you a question. Let's back up, because if you're feeling too good about yourself, I want to make sure and take care of that and make sure you walk away with a little bit of guilt and shame, right? That's actually a joke. But just take a step back. Last 7 days, just you and me, last 7 days, how'd you do at loving God? Did you really love God with all of your heart? With all of your mind? With all of your soul? I mean, you're telling me that not one thing competed for your heart this week. Not one thought went contrary to what God might have liked your mind to be focused on. Not one thing pulled at your soul in a different direction. Right. For real, right? And it doesn't take much humility to say, okay, wait a minute, hold on. I was feeling good, but now, well, we got to go here. Did you really love your neighbor as yourself? There's not one moment this week where you said or did something stupid or mean or ugly or failed to do something that you should have done. Right? All of a sudden, we're like, wait. Like, just love, man. Like, I didn't think we were going to go here. And James is going to help us have a different conversation of, okay, wait. I didn't do those things perfectly. I mean, I'm like motivated by them, right? But if I got to do those things perfectly, then I might be in trouble, right? Like if it takes perfection, if I have to love God with all of my heart, soul, and mind, and I've got to love my neighbor as myself completely, holistically, to be made right with God, I don't know about you, but I'm in trouble. And the point of this conversation is to put a pressure on us, and in his readers, you have to remember, they've been playing favorites, and so you might not be in that seat, but he's putting a pressure on you and I that if a relationship with God is dependent on perfection, then I need help. I need help. Now, here's what's really cool. In Matthew 5, it's not going to be on the screen, but in Matthew 5:17, Jesus was having another conversation, and he said, I didn't come to get rid of the law. I came to fulfill it. See, sometimes we look at the list of all these things that God says to do or don't do, and the reason he's a good dad who loves us, and it's a good thing you shouldn't lie to someone. He's not just making up rules out of nowhere. They're things that we would qualify as moral or good, and so if it takes having perfection to be in a right relationship with God, you and I are in trouble, but Jesus lived a perfect life. And so he said, I didn't come to get rid of the law. I came to fulfill it, to meet it at every angle. Why? For you and me. For you and me. You and I don't have the capacity to love God with all of our heart and soul and mind and to love our neighbor as ourselves on our own. But Jesus came to fulfill the law, to meet it at every requirement. You see, so God doesn't grade on a curve, right? Like, I know, like, in the world we live in, C's get degrees, right? And I'm grateful for that because I graduated multiple different scenarios because C's get degrees. Well, God doesn't grade on a curve when it comes to a relationship with him.
I get a spiritual grade.
Yeah, it's different, right? And so this is a different conversation that he's inviting us into. Now, let's go to verse 9 and watch the transition, okay? He says in verse 9, but. Now, he's talking to these Christians, so you have to be able to contextualize that this might not be as weighty for you, but it was for them because they were playing favorites. If you show partiality, you're committing a sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors or lawbreakers, okay? So just wait, pause for just a second before we go through the verse. If you're like me, maybe you're not convinced. The first conversation is, okay, I'm not perfect, therefore I need help. Well, maybe you're here, you're like, I'm pretty good. Like, me and God are good. I think I'm going to be okay. Like, the good outweighs the bad. We had a conversation 2 weeks ago. I'm going to steal this chair. We had a conversation around comparing chairs. And so we tend to look at what chair we sit in and what chair other people are sitting in. And so, like, if my chair's higher up than yours, then I feel better about myself because I don't do the things that you do and I'm not as bad as them, or I don't have the same propensities as them. And so we can start to compare our seating order. And he's having a conversation of, like, man, you know what? I'm pretty good. Like, if I'm just looking at my chair, me and God should be good. So if you're like me and you tend towards that, James is going to have this conversation for you and I. He says, if you show partiality, you're committing a sin. And you're convicted as a lawbreaker. Right? And so we have a hard time. Okay, the lawbreaker. Let's say you're speeding and you get a ticket. Did you deserve it? The answer is yes. Right? Even if you don't like it, did you break the law? It's pretty black and white, right? And so he's saying, hey, if you show partiality, if you were unloving towards someone else, you're convicted of breaking the law. Well, maybe you're here and you're like, you know what? Yeah, that's unloving, but I'm not playing favorites, so I'm good. Well, sit tight, okay? Verse 10, for whoever keeps the whole law, but fails in one point, has become guilty of all of it. And so maybe you're here and you say, you know what? I don't play favorites, but here's my question for you. Is there anywhere that you've been unloving? Anywhere at all in your relationships? Any person, close, far, coworker, neighbor, family member, that you've been unloving to? He's saying if we fail in one point, we're guilty of it all. And so just because we sit in a certain chair and we're not doing things that other people are doing doesn't mean we're not guilty of breaking the law. Then he goes on and gives a very generic example, verse 11. For he who said, he's talking about God, don't commit adultery, also said don't murder. And if you don't commit adultery but do murder, you become a transgressor of the law. He does a comparison. Adultery and murder, okay? Let's just black and white examples. Pretty easy. All right, so adultery. Let's say you came to me. Let's say I cheated on my wife. You say, Drake, did you have an affair? Well, let's say my response was, only 63% of an affair. It's only 63%. You'd be like, no, bro. You either did or you didn't. Or let's say I killed somebody. You came to me and said, Drake, did you murder that person? I only 73% murdered them. I mean, like they're not that murdered, right? Like, and what you're like, you're crazy. It's yes or no. It's black or white. And so maybe you're here and you think, well, man, I'm good because I haven't done either. I haven't killed nobody. I haven't cheated on anybody. I'm good. And me and God are good. Well, Jesus does a really good job, and James knows this, of taking external behaviors and turning them on our hearts. And so Jesus taught that hatred in your heart towards someone else is the equivalent of murder. Well, crap, right? Okay, well, I ain't killed nobody on the outside. The point is they're black and white. You either did or you didn't. You're either guilty or you're not. You're a murderer or you're not. You cheated on your wife or you didn't. There's no 63% of an affair. And so Jesus takes it a step further on the adultery conversation. He says, you know what? You might not have done anything externally, but if you lust after a woman in your heart and in your mind, it's the same thing as committing adultery. You're just as guilty. Okay. Well, Jesus, we weren't talking about my heart, so let's just move on, right? What's the point? The point is, and again, he's talking to these Christians who've been playing favorites, and he's talking to them saying, quit trying to justify your actions, right? They've been trying to find loopholes of why playing favorites is okay, and he said, listen, we can walk around this all day. The point is you're guilty. You're playing favorites, and it's unloving. So, no matter where you find yourself, you fail at one point, you're guilty. You're guilty. You're guilty. You feeling good? Like James is really trying to encourage us, right? You with me? Like, yeah, I feel so good about myself right now. And so ask the question, just for you and me, right? Sitting where you are, is there anywhere that you've been unloving in the last 7 days? Let's just say you're a saint, and the answer is no. All right, how about since you were born? Anywhere you've been unloving? And James is trying to make a point, an extreme point, because they're trying to justify their behavior. And he says, we're all guilty. And that puts us in a place of need. Now check out verse 12. It gets better, I promise, okay? I know that was rough, but it gets a little better. Verse 12 of James. I'm sorry. You good? Oh, no. Okay, well, I'll read it for you. Verse 12. It'll go back up as soon as we get a second. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. Whatever you do and whatever you say, he says, take a step back, pay attention to your actions, your behaviors, your words, your motives. Whatever you do and whatever you say, live as if someone who is under the law of liberty. Now, let's take a step back. This law of liberty, it came from King Jesus, okay? And so you and I think we like meek and mild Jesus. We like the Jesus that is our friend, and the Jesus that multiplies loaves and hopefully Oreos one day. We like the Jesus that turned water into wine. We like servant Jesus. We like sacrificial Jesus. We don't talk a lot about King Jesus, but when he gave this Matthew 22 law, the great commandment, it wasn't the great suggestion, right? We started this conversation with the question, what does it take to be right with God? And the answer was perfection. And because God doesn't grade on a curve, you and I need some help. The good news is that Jesus took the test, passed with 100%, and through faith and trust in Jesus, we get his test scores. And so he mentions Here it is. Great. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. We don't like that word, judged. But here's the deal. Everyone at the end of their life is going to stand before God and be judged with or without Jesus. That's the reality, right? I love you as your pastor. There's some hard things in the Bible. We love friendly Jesus that talks about love. But listen, if there was no weight, if there was no judgment, Jesus didn't have to die. If there was nothing on the other side of this life, there's no reason for Jesus to die. The reason we need to be made right with God is because we're not right with God naturally. Now listen, I know this is heavy. I know this is hard. I'm just a messenger, okay? So don't shoot me. It's a heavy weight. Now, if we're humble and we sit and at least listen, the point is we're going to stand before God with or without Jesus, and that answer is what dictates how we're scored. We can either have Jesus' score on our behalf or not. Now watch what happens. For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Verse 13, this is unique. If you struggle, that word mercy, it means to extend what's not deserved. It also, you could just translate it as being loving. And so if you can't be merciful or loving towards others, it might mean that you have not received that mercy in the first place. Our capacity to extend a love that is sacrificial is not in ourselves. We can't find that or muster that in ourselves. And so if you find yourself struggling, you might have been around some Christians or seen some people who do really hateful, ugly things and then call themselves Jesus followers or call themselves Christians or they go to church. Listen, there's some people who attend church and call themselves Christians, but their mentality would be that they stood in a garage and they would be a car. Does that make sense? Like just because you go to church doesn't mean that you have that identity as a relationship with God. We're going to see in a second that it's faith in Jesus. That's it. Just trusting that what Jesus did on the cross when he died and rose again is enough for you and I. And so listen, he says that for judgment's without mercy to the one who's shown no mercy, but mercy triumphs over judgment. This is huge. This is like the big finale, okay? This is going to leave us heavily encouraged. Listen, in my life, because of Jesus, I get mercy instead of judgment. Jesus was judged on my behalf and on the world's behalf so that we do not receive what we do deserve. And that incredible love is what makes us right with God. Now listen, because I received mercy, it's what I dish out to others. Let me give you another example, okay? So God loves me. And we saw that the demonstration of that in 1 John was Jesus proving God's love by giving his life, a literal demonstration. God loves me. Now I love him. I did not have a natural disposition towards God. Romans 5:8 tells us that we don't love God naturally out of our own hearts and minds. We love because he first loved us. So at 15, I hear about the love of God, not the religion, not read the Bible, give money, be a good person, and hopefully it all works out in the end. I hear about the incredible love of God that wants a relationship with me at 15, and all I have to do is trust that what Jesus did is enough to make me right with God. He loved me. Then in response, I begin to love him. And you know what happens? Over time, not perfectly, but through a process, I begin to love what God loves. My capacity to love others increases as my relationship with God increases. In my life, because of Jesus, I get mercy instead of judgment. And therefore, I dish out what I receive. I didn't deserve it. Therefore, I have the capacity to extend it to others who don't deserve it. Does that make sense? Because I did not deserve the love of God, there's not a single person on the planet that has to deserve my love to receive it. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean my pride doesn't get in the way. Doesn't mean I'm not selfish in the moment. But if I surrender in my own heart and mind to God in that moment and ask him for the capacity to love them, I have the ability to. Here's the big idea. You ready for this? You got to smoke what you're selling, okay? You got to smoke what you're selling. So the question is, are you dishing out what you've received? If you struggle to give it out, it might mean that you struggled to receive it in the first place. It's really easy to say, wow, God, I didn't deserve that, and then turn it around and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to give that away, not because they deserve it, because I didn't deserve it in the first place. And so listen, it's inconsistent to receive something we don't deserve and then withhold it from someone else. Isn't it? Yes. It's so inconsistent. It's so hypocritical. And James is trying to help. Guys, you receive this mercy so freely. Why would you withhold it from someone else? Listen, I can't help but smoke what I'm selling. It's too good not to. It's too good not to. And you can Google that, okay, if you're really confused. Right? I'm not talking about sharing your weed, okay? I'm talking about when it comes to living a consistent lifestyle, to smoke what you're selling. So let me back up, okay, as we close out this conversation. Hopefully, I know the judgment conversation is heavy. That's a consistent theme. I know that I said the love of God is a consistent theme. The only reason the love of God is a theme is because God had to intervene in that judgment as a result of humanity drifting away from him on our own free will. And God in his love is not going to impose his will on us and make us love him. That's called abuse. God does not make us love him. He opens the door of opportunity for us to love him. And because he's not going to grade on a curve, Jesus was judged for us so that we can have complete access to a relationship with God free of charge. So maybe you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus. Listen, the macro calling on your life is to love God and love people. And if you have a hard week and you're trying to remember a lot and you're trying to keep it all together, listen, just remember to live love. And that's not meant to be a catchy statement that you feel good about but don't do anything with. It's okay, if I can get close to God and then be reminded of his love for me, he's going to fill me with a power that gives me the capacity to love others. Just to love God and love people this week. Listen, the macro calling on your life, if you're just struggling with purpose, wondering what to do with your life, trying to find that thing that's going to fulfill you, God created you, have a relationship with him, and extend it to other people on the planet. Your macro calling is to love God and love people so others can love God and love people so others can love God and love people. That is so simple. And we can embrace it. Now listen, no matter what the micro version of your story looks like, whether, no matter what your field of industry is that you're going into, no matter what your specific gifts are, a daily relationship with God fueled by love can and will affect every area of your life, okay? So no matter where God has you on the planet, when it comes to your job and your workplace and your neighborhood, the macro calling can infect and should infect everything. Now, one of our desires is to help you as a follower of Jesus grow into a healthy, multiplying disciple. Don't be confused by that word. The word disciple means follower of Jesus. In fact, Jesus didn't use the word Christian. He used the word follower and the invitation to follow me. And so it's not I go to church, therefore I'm a Christian. It's I've given my life to Jesus and I'm a follower of his. And our desire for you is, listen, that God could airdrop you anywhere on the planet. We live in one of the most transient cities in America. And so rather than being a church that's upset when people leave, we are seeing it as an opportunity to send people all over the world with the love of God and a love for people. And so our desire for you is that God could airdrop you anywhere on the planet and you would continue to love God and love people. You would continue to make disciples and plant churches. You would continue to keep smoking what you're selling. Are you with me? And that's the simple version of it. So listen, we have tools for you. At the Next Step Desk, we have ways to help you grow in your relationship with God, ways to get plugged in and use your skills to serve. We have tools to help you do that. Now listen, maybe you're not a follower of Jesus in the room. And we shared it right at the beginning. I just want to bring us back to it. We know love because Jesus gave his life for us. And the conversation, man, is so that you could respond to that today. I responded to that at 15. I heard about Jesus a lot, but I never responded and said, wow, Jesus gave his life for me so I can have a relationship with God. I want to trust him and ask him to save me and set me free. That's what happened at 15, and it can happen with you. So my encouragement for you is light up today. Right? Just light it up. Start smoking what you're selling. This is a funny conversation, guys. You can laugh, okay? So listen. Once you smoke it, you can't help but sell it. Right? You with me? Seriously. Once you experience the love of God, you can't help. It just comes out of you. It might not look like me, right? Every personality is different, so that's fine. You have permission to be you. If you're a follower of Jesus in the room, in humility, just remember what you received from God. And ask the question. Listen, every day this week, you can write this question down, put a reminder in your phone. It's what I've been asking myself every day this week. Every moment this week, every conflict this week, every difficult situation, what does love require of me? That's the filter by which I am engaging the week that I find myself in. So I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to sing a few more songs. Will you bow your heads with me?